The Audi LMDh project is officially dead. Kamui Kobayashi gives us an update on his IMSA status for 2023. And we break down yet another fuel mileage nail-biter at VIR. Buckle up, cause you're about to go off in the S's. Yes, it's something that we have been expecting for a little while now, but Audi has officially announced the discontinuation of their LMDh project. This came in conjunction with their announcement that they will enter Formula One as an engine supplier. During the press conference announcing them joining Formula One, that's when they announced that their LMDh project was officially dead. But of course, the rumors for this, they date back all the way to March, when the project was officially put on hold in what was believed to be in favor of a Formula One project. It really is a shame, because it is understood right now that that project was so close to the start of on-track testing when the announcement was made to put the program on hold. Now, Audi did reaffirm that they intend to continue supporting customer racing in the form of GT2, GT3, and GT4 cars, as well as their newly released, I guess, Audi TCR car that we see some teams already running in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. So big news there for Audi, but there's also more news out of the Cadillac camp. Cadillac recently completed a 3-day test at Road Atlanta. Drivers Earl Bamber, Sebastian Bourdais, Pipo Derani, Alex Lynn, you're starting to talk about the who's who in the Cadillac garage here. They were able to all turn laps during this 3-day test, and it was the first test that this car has had with functional headlights. Yeah, they were rocking that NASCAR style previously with, well, they had it kind of like taped over, I guess. But officially, they have the headlights on there now. The main focus of this testing is still just continue to work on durability, especially in advance of those two grueling races to start the 2023 season, the Rolex 24 and the 12 Hours of Sebring. Sports Car 365 also reported that the next test is supposed to happen on the Labor Day weekend, and that is going to be a test that also includes Porsche and Acura. Speaking of Acura, Meyershank Racing announced that Tom Blomqvist will remain in their stable for the 2023 season. It was announced that the 29-year-old will stay with the team as it transitions to the GTP category with the number 60 Acura ARX06. It was also confirmed in this announcement that Blomqvist will get a confirmed IndyCar test next year with the team. Now, Ollie Jarvis is also said to be returning, but there has been no official announcement made there yet. And fellow Acura GTP team Wayne Taylor Racing, they also recently confirmed that both of their full season drivers, Ricky Taylor and Felipe Albuquerque, will be back in that full season ride next year. Speaking of Albuquerque, he recently turned his first laps in that Acura ARX06 at Road Atlanta. He and Ricky Taylor completed a multi-day test of their own just after Cadillac wrapped up theirs. And lastly, former Audi factory driver Renee Rast has officially completed his first test in the BMW M Hybrid LMDh car. He was joined by factory BMW drivers Connor De Filippi and Sheldon Vanderlinde in that test in what could be a preview of that 2023 IMSA lineup. Rast is expected to be ready for a full-time LMDh seat in 2024, which would presumably come in the World Endurance Championship when BMW has a full season entry there. But the IMSA Endurance Cup schedule is quite intriguing for him and could be just exactly what he needs to help him get up to pace in this car in 2023 to set him up for a successful entry into the World Endurance Championship in 2024. It would also coincide quite nicely as he has to balance still some GT racing as well as a Formula E commitment with McLaren. former F1 driver and current Toyota World Endurance Championship driver / team principal Kamui Kobayashi gave us an update on his IMSA status for the 2023 season. He told motorsport.com, "It's not about what I want to do, to be honest. It's more that it's getting busier, so I'm not sure if I can stay in IMSA." Of course, Kamui moving over to that driver and team principal role with Toyota Gazoo Racing in the World Endurance Championship this year certainly has put a bit more work on his plate, but he did still maintain his ride with the Action Express Racing number 48 in the Michelin Endurance Cup events. Doesn't sound like that's going to continue into next season, especially with the limited availability of some of those Cadillac entries, but we'll keep our ears peeled for more information on that. If Kamui doesn't end up coming back, it's going to be a shame to not have him racing in IMSA anymore, but we'll still get to see him in the World Endurance Championship at least. Hopping into some GTD news now, Grasser Racing Team, which you'll recall, they previously have raced in IMSA, but this year went over to run the Lamborghini DTM program. They are plotting a return to IMSA, at least for the opening 2 Endurance Cup races. Team owner Gottfried Grasser revealed that the team plans to return to IMSA next season for the opening Rolex 24 Hours and Sebring 12-hour races, which they of course have won the Rolex 24 in 2018 and 2019. IMSA also dropped a bit of a bombshell on us this past week with some big news coming about GTD. They announced the reinstatement of the Sprint Cup Championship, as well as many of those enhancements that they spoke about during the IMSA State of the Sport address that targeted the bronze drivers and that Bob Aitken Cup in the GTD category. It's a big development with a lot to unpack. We're going to cover it all in a dedicated video, and I will link that video here when it has been released. Speaking of bronze drivers and having success, Ryan Hardwick has indicated his plans to contest next year's 24 Hours of Le Mans. The Wright Motorsports driver will get the invite for winning this year's Bob Aitken Bronze Cup Award, and he intends to take that to Le Mans in the form of a GTE AM Porsche ride. And in some more general IMSA news, it is getting its own docu-series. We've seen Drive to Survive. There's a new NASCAR one that was just released as well. This docu-series is going to focus on the Pro-Am drivers and their lives both on and off the track. Staff for this production have previous experience with The Gentleman Driver, a great movie if you haven't seen that already, and Drive to Survive as well. The series will begin production in December and follow the entire 2023 season. I'll link the entire article announcing that in the show notes. And in some fun news, VIR got a statue of the Michelin Man. Yes, Michelin has served as the primary sponsor for the VIR race weekend, and the mascot has, of course, very prominently featured on those trophies. The Michelin Man even got to meet his new statue this past weekend. Just a fun little piece of content that got put out there. But leaving behind the Michelin Man, let's get into some of the racing that took place this weekend. And starting off with the Michelin Pilot Challenge. In qualifying for the Virginia is for Lovers Grand Prix, it was Kenny Murillo who set the fastest time in his 72 Murillo Racing Mercedes in that Grand Sport category. He was almost 1.2 seconds faster than the number 8 McCann Racing Porsche, driven by Michael McCann. Meanwhile, in TCR, it was Tyler Gonzalez who took pole in his Van der Stur Racing Veloster. He was almost 5/10 ahead of second place Harry Gottsacker and the number 98 Brian Herta Autosport Elantra. Big gaps at the front of both of these fields, but they were certainly much tighter races than qualifying would lead us to believe. In fact, it was more than just tight based on the times on track. It was tight for fuel as well. It seems like we've seen so many of these fuel-saving, fuel mileage races in IMSA so far this season, and Saturday's race was no different from this. At the end of the day, it was Joey Hand who was handed the lead on the final lap in the Grand Sport class after the number 21 Riley Motorsports Mercedes, driven by Scott Andrews, ran out of fuel. Yes, another Mercedes that ran out of fuel on the final lap. There was a late race safety car that set the stage for the mayhem that would ensue here after the number 22 Hardpoint Porsche came to a stop on track with just 10 minutes to go. IMSA did a great job, and the entire track crew did a great job of clearing that car, and we were able to go racing for an intense 2-lap shootout that would ensue, with Joey Hand in that number 40 PF Racing Mustang restarting in 4th position. Before that restart would even take place, though, Spencer Pompelli in the number 38 BGB Motorsports Porsche, he also ran out of fuel just moments before that green flag would wave. Though he would be able to safely make it out of the way, and the race was able to at least get restarted for this shootout. On the restart, Hand made quick work of the number 72 Murillo Racing Mercedes of Christian Simzak and fellow Mustang driver Billy Johnson in the number 59 Core Motorsports entry to position themselves in 2nd place before Andrews ran out of fuel. This was just Hand's 2nd race in the Michelin Pilot Challenge this season, and teammate James Pisak would stand on top of the podium with him, but it was not Billy Johnson in that Core Motorsports Mustang that would officially get 2nd place, as they would be disqualified due to a post-race fuel capacity infraction that was found in post-race tech. This meant that another Mustang, the 877 PF Racing Mustang of Kyle Marcelli and Sheena Monk, they would take home 2nd place in what has been a really strong run of races for them. And rounding off the podium was the number 64 Team TGM Porsche of Owen Twinkler and Ted Giovannis. Also of note here was earlier on in the race, points leader, the number 7 Volt Racing Aston Martin, brought out a full course yellow with an electrical issue that caused them to stop on track. They ended up getting back out on track 4 laps down and would finish 19th in class. And in TCR, it was the 2021 champions Michael Lewis and Taylor Hagler who took the class win in their number 1 Brian Herta Autosport Elantra. They held off number 77 Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai of Tyler Maxon and Mason Filippi. They took 2nd place, and Carl Whitmer and Victor Gonzalez in the number 99 Victor Gonzalez Racing Team Honda Civic rounded out that podium. IMSA Prototype Challenge was also racing this weekend. Of course, we'll know that next year as the VP Racing Fuel Sports Car Challenge, but for now, it's still the IMSA Prototype Challenge. And in this one, it was Tonis Kazimits who dominated the race at VIR. He led from flag to flag for his 3rd race win in the 4 races that he's competed in this season. He took pole and the victory after a Friday practice crash that saw his Wolver Racing crew needing to repair the car. A late full course yellow gave the number 23 Duquesne of Alex Corrivia and teammate Mimo Gidley some hope, but they ended up getting stuck behind 6 lap cars between them and the leader, meaning that they could never really mount a proper charge. Patrick Kajala and Brian Thiens completed the podium. The rest of the schedule was also unveiled for the VP Racing Fuel Sports Car Challenge that will, of course, replace the IMSA Prototype Challenge next season. The final 2 races are confirmed to be on the weekend of January 20th and 22nd, which means they will once again be supporting the Roar before the 24. Now, there was some speculation that the remaining race weekend for this, again, new series would be chosen to support NASCAR on the streets of Chicago, but clearly that has not been the case. And also in this announcement, they also have swapped a date that had been previously put on the schedule. They're no longer going to WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. They instead are going to be going to Lime Rock Park. Interesting one with this one, you know, those GT4 or GTX cars, or GSX cars that are racing in this series. there's not going to be any GT4 cars at Lime Rock Park, or there wasn't going to be with the Michelin Pilot Challenge. So it was going to be a TCR only event. So this still brings GT4 cars to that race weekend, so I kind of like that, I think. The Mazda Idemitsu MX-5 Cup also announced their mystery races on the calendar, as the final 2 races for them will take place supporting IMSA at Laguna Seca, so kind of swapping out with the VP Racing Fuel Sports Car Challenge there. And they'll be racing at Laguna Seca on the May 12th to 14th weekend. They also had a couple more great races at VIR, with race 1 being taken by Tyler Gonzalez in his number 51 Copeland Motorsports entry. He beat out Connor Zilic in the number 72 Hickson Motorsports entry by just 76 1,000ths of a second. It was about half a car length at the line. Very, very close between the two of them. And the podium was rounded off by defending series champ Gresham Wagner, who was a distant 2/10 behind Gonzalez. Amazing fact about this race is Gonzalez suffered a mechanical issue in qualifying that meant he had to start the race at the very back in 27th position. So a great rebound race effort for Tyler Gonzalez. In race 2, though, it was not Tyler Gonzalez, it was Connor Zilic who bumped up a spot on the podium to take that victory. It was a hard-fought battle all race long with Gresham Wagner, who ended up finishing in second, and defending Rookie of the Year Sam Paley in the number 28 Macumbi McAleer Racing entry. He was also up there fighting for much of the race, and including in those final 2 laps, the 3 of them really going at it hard. It was good racing, and of course Paley ended up finishing in 3rd. This was his second top 5 of the weekend, though, and what was a really strong weekend for him. As far as the point standings go, it's looking like it's kind of a 2-horse race. Jared Thomas has a 55-point advantage on Gresham Wagner right now. Connor Zilic is a further 85 points back from Wagner. There's still lots of good battles to be had here. There's a great battle unfolding for the right around 9th through 11th. I believe they're separated by 10 points, those 3 cars. And of course, if you'll recall, the MX-5 Cup, they pay out the top 10 finishers in the standings at the end of the season. So there's going to be some great racing to wrap up the season at Michelin Raceway, Road Atlanta. And we don't often talk about the Porsche Carrera Cup North America too much, but Jeff Gordon is returning to racing in the Porsche Carrera Cup North America for 2 rounds that are taking place at Indianapolis. He's going to reunite with his former NASCAR crew chief, Ray Evernham, and they are going to reunite in his famous number 24 entry. Fortunately, some people were speculating that, oh, maybe it'll have the DuPont rainbow scheme on it, but it's just a very nice, clean silver and black car. Gordon does have a fair bit of previous IMSA racing experience. He did win the Rolex 24 in just his 2nd attempt in 2017, and he is also just one of 4 drivers to have won both the Rolex 24 and the Daytona 500. Moving up to the headliner for the race weekend, the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. In practice, they saw a couple of small incidents here, one being for the Wright Motorsports Porsche of Ryan Hardwick. He went off in turn 14. He suffered some small bodywork damage, but was able to return later in that session. It was in practice 1, though, that the number 79 Mercedes of Jules Gounon went off after just completing 12 laps in the session, and there was some pretty significant damage to that Mercedes. They were able to fix that, and they made it out for 2nd practice on Saturday. Skipping ahead, though, to qualifying, it was Ross Gunn who picked up the pole for the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin. He set a 143.953 to beat Antonio Garcia in the number 3 Corvette by just over 0.7 of a second. The number 9 Pfaff, driven by Matt Campbell, they will start the race in third. Garcia's lap came just before he spun out as well and lightly tapped the barriers with 5 minutes to go in the session. He was able to keep that car going though, and there was no red flag or full course yellow flag that needed to be thrown to retrieve that Corvette. Meanwhile, in GTD, the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes, they've continued their pretty strong run as of late here. They took pole position in that class, edging out Aiden Reed in the number 51 Rick Ware Racing Acura by just 7/100ths of a second. And if you think that wasn't close, well, Madison Snow in the Paul Miller Racing BMW was just 4/1000ths behind Reed. You know what? In fact, the entire freaking GTD field was separated by just less than a second, which is just kind of goes to show how close all of these cars were last weekend. If you're enjoying this, then let me know by crashing your thumb into that like button. Well, heading into race day, the weather was great, and by the time the green flag flew, it really didn't take long for the number 42 of Jaden Conwright to find some trouble. His Lamborghini Huracan appeared to have some sort of mechanical failure in the opening minutes of the race, and he went spinning off the track and into the barrier. Jaden did a great job, though, of preventing that car from hitting the wall hard. It really ended up just being a light tap, and he ultimately was able to navigate that car safely off track and prevent a full course yellow from being thrown. With the exception of that, though, it was a pretty quiet opening 40 minutes, as the leaders seemed content to just follow each other around and save a little bit of fuel. In fact, the top 4 cars in GTD Pro were separated by just 1.7 seconds. Meanwhile, in GT3, the top 3 were separated by just a second and a half. They were kind of developing into these little packs by the time that the first round of pit stops started, and that was all triggered by the number 96 of Robbie Foley, who was stuck in the back of one of those kind of mini packs, and this was just shy of minimum drive time, so Foley was not able to get out of the car at this time, but it was in an attempt to undercut that group of cars in front of him, and man oh man, undercut he did. We'll talk about that in a moment here. But it wasn't until a few minutes later that more of the field began to dive into the pits. And of course, this was after the minimum drive time had elapsed. And on these pit stops, it wasn't without issue on some of them. We did see some drive-through penalties that some teams picked up, but we also saw a spin. And we know that sometimes, we'll talk about it before we head to Road Atlanta especially, but sometimes pit stops, cold tires, driver changes, they can lead to some incidents, and that's exactly what happened to Catherine Legg, as maybe just got a little bit too excited on her outlap. She went for a quick spin down through the roller coaster. Fortunately, she didn't hit anything or anybody, and she was able to continue on her way. But just worth noting there that a little bit of a spin. And by the time that these GTD pit stops had cycled through, it was the number 96 Turner Motorsports BMW, who had jumped from 6th place, remember when they were back in that little pack, to 1st place as a result of their undercut. The IMSA TV crew did a great little quick interview with Bill Oberlin shortly after. Of course, Bill Oberlin not in the car at this point yet, but he spoke to kind of this strategy and how they really needed to capitalize and bolt ahead now, as they were going to need to take on more fuel on their second and final pit stop that would likely lose them lots of the time that they gained on this first stop. GTD was also shaken up, as well as the number 3 Corvette, now driven by Jordan Taylor, took the lead from Ross Gunn, and he jumped out to a 10-second lead. In fact, Gunn dropped to 3rd position, as they were also overtaken by the number 9 Pfaff Porsche. An hour and 40 minutes into the race, though, trouble hit, and this time for the championship points leading at the time, Korthoff Mercedes. They had a right rear wheel that was loose, and they had to limp that car around the track. This was just a couple of laps after they came out for their pit stop, so it seemed to have wiggled loose after a couple laps, which was kind of strange. They ended up getting that tire tightened, and they rejoined the race one lap down. Just a few minutes later, right around the halfway point of the race, though, was when the full course yellow was flown. Philippe Ellis, who was battling with Maxime Martin in GTD through the S's, and Martin, he just went slightly wide to avoid one of the very rough and tough curbs that are here at VIR. In going off to avoid the curb, he ended up collecting a sponsor sign, half of which got caught up on the front of his Mercedes, with the other half being thrown back onto the track. Thus, the gigantic sign board that was there on the track resulted in the full course yellow. Now, this full course yellow led to most of the cars making pit stops, with it believed at the time that nobody could make it to the race on fuel. Remember that. With an hour and 8 minutes to go, Catherine Legge and Andy Lally, who were the two cars that ended up staying out on this pit stop, knowing that everybody needed to make another stop anyways, they led us back to green. With there being some great battles off the top here in GTD Pro, with Ricky Taylor getting by Ben Barnicoat in the Vassar Sullivan Lexus, and then moments later, he also leaped John Edwards in the Team RLL BMW for second place in class. GTD was a little bit more spread out, with Andy Lally taking the race lead and heading out from there. He led up until the final round of pit stops, which happened with about 55 minutes to go. And most of these stops, because of the previous stops that these teams made under full course yellow, it was just fuel only, with a couple of teams opting for a two-tire strategy, including the Pfaff Porsche, who actually took two rear tires, which is an interesting one. Unfortunately, though, for Andy Lally, as these pit stops cycled through, he caught some debris on his outlap, which cut a tire and forced him to come back down pit road. A handful of cars ended up holding out right until the end of the race to come in and make their final stops, with a good handful of them actually making their stops in the final few minutes of the race. In fact, fuel strategy was a huge talking point late in the race, specifically in the GTD category. The number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus in GTD was one of these big talking points, as they had a hiccup when hooking up the fuel hose on that final pit stop, and it looked like they didn't get enough fuel in it. But the even bigger talking point was the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, who did not make another pit stop after that full course yellow that we saw, with about an hour and 10 minutes to go. They were in big time fuel saving mode, and their final stint, they made it to the checkered flag, but their final stint was a wild 38 green flag laps, and they were just barely able to nurse it to that checkered flag. Taking victory, though, was Matthew Jaminet and Matt Campbell in their number 9 Pfaff Porsche. They claimed their 5th IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship victory of the season, which was an 0.8 of a second win over Jordan Taylor in the number 3 Corvette. Pfaff actually ran out of fuel on the in-lap and needed to be pushed to victory celebrations, showing you just how close these teams were cutting it with fuel. And the podium was wrapped up in GTD Pro by the number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus of Ben Barnicoat and Jack Hawksworth, who were stuck deep back in the GTD traffic. This victory means that Pfaff just needs to start the final race of the season at Road Atlanta to lock up the full season GTD Pro Championship. In GTD, it was the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes of Philippe Ellis and Russell Ward that took the victory. Maxime Martin in the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, he crossed the line in second and promptly ran out of fuel. He and teammate Romain DeAngelis took over the GTD Championship lead, heading into the final round at Petit Le Mans. And rounding out the podium was Brian Sellers in the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW. Just with starting the race, they also wrapped up the Sprint Cup Championship. And speaking of the Sprint Cup Championship, let's show you the final standings for those right now. It was Paul Miller Racing, as we mentioned, that took the championship there, with the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin coming in second place, and the number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus wrapping up the podium there in third. In the full season GTD Pro Championship, we talked about Pfaff and the lead that they have there. It is a 275-point lead over the Corvette racing duo of Antonio Garcia and Jordan Taylor. The number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus is in third there. They are 281 points behind the leader, but a good battle unfolding there for second place in that championship at least. And let me tell you, this GTD battle is really getting spicy here heading into Road Atlanta. It is now the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin that leads the way there with 2,630 points. That is a 45-point advantage over the Gilbert Korthoff Mercedes, who are in second, and the Wright Motorsports Porsche, which Ryan Hardwick voiced before this round at VIR. They just want to leave with a clear shot of being able to win that title. They are going to have a chance. They are just 57 points behind the leader, so it's nothing is decided in this category yet, especially amongst those top three. It's a 10-hour race we still got at Road Atlanta, and there's still lots to play for here in this GTD category. Well, next up on the calendar for IMSA is Motul Petit Le Mans in October, but until then, there is some great racing to tide us over. Next weekend, we have the World Endurance Championship heading to Fuji for the 6 hours of Fuji. Formula One is going to be in Monza, and IndyCar heads to Laguna Seca. And of course, we can't forget about the 24-hour series. They are heading to Spain. Now this week we got the unfortunate news that Audi has canceled their LMDh entry, but last week we got some great news as we finally got to see the Acura ARX06 fully unveiled. You can learn all about that right here. But until the next one, I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.